All right, Ken Yi Chu, thank you so much for joining us once again.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
Uh, what have you been up to lately? What's been going on? We were talking, hobbies before, but just in terms of, generally speaking, what's Ken Yi Chu been doing out there in the world?
Well, I told you earlier, I went fishing for the first time in Ontario. It's been a while since done anything outdoorsy. I usually do that with my dad, who's back in on BC. So this was the first time I was pushed to do anything outdoorsy. So I went fishing in Bronte Creek. Not the most pleasant place to go fishing, but you know what? It was the closest thing, down Gordon Street. So we did that. Caught a big king salmon. So I'm happy. So got to check that off
Check that
the
off the bucket
box.
list.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
Uh,
other than that, oh yeah, sorry.
well, no, keep going. I was gonna get into business if you were done, but
Oh, I was just gonna say my wife got a new job at Guelph Animal Hospital. I
oh,
believe
okay,
that's the land is city owned land.
right,
We're the landlords of. So I'm technically part landlord of my wife.
okay. All right,
So
that complicates an already complicated
yeah,
relationship.
there's like I guess
Yeah.
there's a maybe a foreseeable conflict of interest. Hopefully
Mm,
not.
hopefully not.
But
Yeah.
no, she got a new job a few months back, so just helping her settle in. But it's not too bad. It's just once shot down Gordon Street, and she's at work. So,
Right, right.
but other
Well,
than that, just homebody, I guess, right?
all right, fair enough. Well, speaking of homebodies, we'll start in Ward 6. Because there was this project that came to council a couple of weeks ago, the redevelopment of that corner of Clare and Gordon. And I know that there are a lot of people who are concerned about that. Not necessarily about what's going there, but just like I think there's been like a dearth of information. And it feels just watching the meeting from my end, it feels like that's going to continue. So as we're looking at like the potential redevelopment of that corner, which is now kind of official, it's been in front of city council. I guess how do you intend, given that's your ward, especially, and people are going to be coming to you especially, to keep people updated about what that redevelopment is going to look like, or even what the process is, or how it's going to develop. Because I think there are, even though there's a lot of questions answered in terms of what it's going to look like, there's still a lot of unanswered questions about when it's going to start.
Yeah, in terms of the project breaking ground, we have no idea. Like for us, we're just facilitating a rezoning um, process in which First Capital, the landowner, like are privy to undertake. And like just for context, I just live outside the 120-meter circulation distance, so I'm quite close. Um, and yeah, like I do have sentimental feelings like towards the theater. Uh, I was quite sad when it closed last year, and I know
Hmm.
there was some speculation if that was preemptive or not, but obviously there was an accident. There's a major flood last year, I believe, that took
Yeah.
place. So they had to gut the theater and renovate portions of it so it's operational again. But anyway, besides the point, it's a zoning exercise that they're undertaking, and I think it's important for people to understand too that First Capital, by nature, they are an asset management uh, company. They own a lot. They've acquired over the years a lot of commercial plazas uh, across Canada, and they have quite a few in the GTA. And that's their main business model. Real estate holdings, asset management, and from the looks of it, and I'm looking at the optics as well as you, right? Even though I have some contact with them as the city representative, it looks like they're just trying to do a zoning change um, and kind of evaluate where the market goes and
Mm.
whether that they're able to position themselves towards other options in the future. But I don't see, like we just have to take them for their word. And that requires a lot of good faith. But we are looking into the future, and no one has a crystal ball as to what's going to happen. But all I am reassured by is that they do have long-term leases in place, and like they do have a reputation and track record of being very respectful of tenants who lease off of their land.
Right.
And so I made a point during that meeting, right? I've had experience going to many plazas. I'm sure many of us have that are occupied by First Capital, and they do support small business owners, and they do make amicable arrangements so that small business owners in particular are able to stay and be good tenants and also provide good services. So like that's all I can really infer based off of First Capital and who they are and what and their reputation. Of course, like they are a private entity and they're privy to do whatever they want. For me, like my goal is to ensure that we can facilitate uh, good outcomes and also advocate to staff and to uh, the future proponents that may end up doing something uh, good community outcomes, right? Like there's going to be a significant parkland dedication that's going to take place. Um, for a lot of us, including myself as a resident, I want to make sure that the traffic flow and circulation is being addressed
Mm.
and that we can iron out those details early on so that by the time we get to a site plan and if and when they decide they want to actually move forward with development, that it can be done in a more seamless way. Because the worst thing you can do is advocate for things that both parties agree logically makes sense when the pro
Right.
forma is all set in stone, right? So
Right.
that's part of the planning process, right? Like if we can get the most pertinent items uh on the table, we want to do that. And that's where advocacy comes in, right? Uh,
Right. You put a couple of things on the table, so to speak, which is like number one is, and I got this impression too, listening to their team at the meeting, that they have a lot of really great renderings and things, but a lot of this is dependent on, as you said, the leases that they already have in place, and there are a lot of businesses in that plaza, not just Cineplex, Dollarama. There's a gym, there's Harvey's, there's all these companies, which may be locally owned in some cases, but are part of like big nationwide corporations. The other piece of this is like the market. We know
yeah.
that in Toronto, there's serious concerns about the condo market. Um, so, there's a piece of that too. But the other piece of this, which I've found kind of difficult, is the misinformation piece. And you touched on it with the movie theater. And I don't know how many times I saw on like Overheard or groups like that on Facebook. It's like, when's the movie theater going to open? And you'd get like 10 people go, well, it's never opening because they're redeveloping that plaza. And it's like, we've kind of added like levels to this, not necessarily of misinformation, but levels of like conditions, like when the lease is expired, if the market is good to justify this, you know, if it's just there's like a big like fat question mark on this redevelopment that, if you're someone who like you lives in the immediate area, you're kind of just stuck in this like I have no idea what's going on here and what my neighborhood's going to look like in 5, 10, 15 years.
Yeah, and I do want to give credit to the people that did come up during that public meeting. I did make it a point to some that reached out to me earlier to really hone in on the traffic flow and circulation because I think city staff in particular need to hear those concerns so that they can take it to heart when they liaise with the developer, right? Because I'm a planner by trade and
Mm.
profession, and I do
Hmm.
urban design. I wish I was able to get into those meetings, but I can't. I have to trust staff to be able to carry those conversations, and sometimes uh, we have to instill that conviction as to what is important. That's where the public process is important and it is handy. But to your point, I think it just comes down to the broader like culture we're in right now, right? Like the paradigm we're in, people are inundated by their own lives and they don't
Right.
know what's in front of them until it happens, right? And that's
Hmm.
the nature of a lot of these public meetings. Uh, think decisions have already been made and people catch wind of it in the last second or they're reacting to something their neighbor said the night before, right? Um,
Mm.
So I don't know how we can facilitate the conversation better, but by other than being consistent with what we are offered in terms of the facts and kind of make our evaluation from there. And I'd just say too, planning by nature is you're operating off of series of assumptions, right? And
Mm,
like the intention is to be as intentional as you can with ground truthing, uh, you know, the facts and forecasting what the outcome may look like down the road. So I think we just have to be willing to have those conversations. Like that's really what planning's all about. And kind of take it from there, right? Because whatever consistently comes up at the end of the day means that there's something important that ought to be addressed. And that's kind of where it's on our judgment and city staff's judgment to piece out, right? But naturally, as people, like we're not good with long-term plan. Like it's not in our instinct, right?
right.
There are interests that pertain to people short term, and there are interests that pertain long term. But you and I were not God, right? So
No.
and and rarely do long-term plans ever come to fruition the way that we first envisioned it. But the
Right.
idea is in this healthy society that we live in, we have the opportunity to for discourse, right? Um, anyways, that was long-winded, but
No, and it's a good segue to what I also want to talk about from that week at council, which is the GID plan, because talking about long-term plans that don't come to fruition as intended, that seems to be what's happening there. And I think there are a lot of people who are struggling with the notion of the Guelph Innovation District secondary plan thought out with all this community engagement, and then the developer buys the land, it comes back and says, well, we're going to do this an entirely different way. And I guess, how do you circle that square when I think there's a lot of mistrust in the community of developers? Um, Housing is now a fairly well seen as a commodity in some quarters. People have, given up on the thought of owning a home, let alone, seeing it as an investment. And I guess, um, from your point of view, is there, I guess, what is the trade-off when you are looking at a plan, looking at what a developer has, and making those decisions, and at what point does, as the Fusion Homes came up and said, like, this plan was created 20 years ago when there was no Facebook and there were no smartphones, and so much has changed in 20 years. But at the same time, a 20-year expectation has been set that this is what that neighborhood is going to look like, or what that area is going to look like.
yeah, I think like to be honest with you, we could preface the conversation a lot better on both sides,
Mm,
because we're leading on a lot of assumptions when we make certain statements, right?
right.
Like on Fusion's end, right? Like just to quote you, oh, the GID plan was 20 years ago. It's not really relevant anymore. I think that's a bit of a misnomer because there
Mm,
are people that were very invested in that process, and it does a disservice to those individuals. And I can see why people get heightened very easily. But on the other hand, uh, the assumptions have changed, right? The GID plan that the city initiated, that was under the assumption that the university had a big role to play, and
hmm
also that they would facilitate a consortium of developers and subtrades to kind of carry out, the plan. But obviously, that's not happening anymore. Like from our knowledge, we have a single entity that's taken over the land holdings, and we have to kind of work relationally with them to see how can they best carry out the vision. And I think that that's the piece that we don't talk about too often, right?
mm,
For me, I think looking back at that meeting, like I was more privy to honor some of the Fusion requests because for the block plan, just because again they are the single entity that's on the site. Um, and at the end of the day, if they have the confidence to carry out some of those requests that they put forward, um, we should do our best to facilitate that, right?
Mm,
For and to be honest with you, like a lot of the decisions um, that were put on the table that meeting, a lot of them were pure planning decisions, pure, and a lot of them come from a design perspective too, right? Like which
mm,
option do you prefer? A lot of it
right,
is preference, in my opinion.
right.
Um, of course, like there's a lot of like how do I put it? There's a lot of conversation around employment and what that looks like, but we have to understand too, like, are we trying to attract base employment in that part of the city? And obviously, with Fusion coming in, we know that's not necessarily going to be the case, right? Like, it's not going to be your Hanlon Creek Park. It's
Right.
not going to be your Stone Road, right? Like that's not the type of outcome that we're looking for. Even if we had, if we tried to retain a larger square footage of land, reality is we cannot attract like that piece of land cannot attract that type of investment. And if you just and if you come to terms with that, then it's more easy to accept the assumption that okay, like we can maybe utilize a smaller square footage, so we can attract more co-working spaces, which you see quite a lot now in Kitchener Waterloo,
Mm,
um, right? And they had to adapt their paradigm as well for how they looked at employment lands. So I do think like some of this requires some more sincere and thorough conversation. But again, like planning is an exercise of evaluating the assumptions, right?
right.
And and sometimes we just, for me at least, the best way to ground truth your assumptions is by looking at what you currently have. And again, based off of what the secondary plan process uh, went through compared to now, we have a known fact compared to what we did before, which is Fusion Homes now occupies that land. And I think that's important to recognize too, right?
Yeah,
So
and I think what I'm getting at though is there's no doubt that plans change, and we just talked about that with what's happening at Cllr. Once upon a time, a big plaza like that with like 500 parking spaces in separate buildings makes a lot of sense. Now that doesn't make a lot of sense. But is there? I guess the way I want to frame this is there something, and this doesn't just pertain to the GID, but is there something that, and I've just detected this, is there something that a developer could ask for that you would kind of have doubts about, even if the promise is more affordable housing or just more housing, period, like the increase of the stock? Because I feel like some developers feel like they can just come to council and say, this is more housing. What are you going to do? Vote against it. It's kind of like a dare. It's like, we're going to make you eat a crap sandwich because you want more housing. Is how does that feel to you?
yeah, so you're a big reader. You went to the Guelph Public Library book
I,
sale not too long ago,
I
right?
did.
I think
Although
I
I
think
did get
really
DVDs there as well.
there you go. I think at the end of the day, uh, we still have to do our due diligence to ensure what they are proposing isn't just some fairy tale.
Mm,
And I think what you're trying to get at is like, how do we at council and at the city make sure we're not getting walked on, right?
right.
How do we make sure that we're actually advocating for the public interest in these negotiations when they come through the door, right? Um, and yeah, like I think you have to look at the plans for its merits. There are a lot of people that aren't aware, but all the planning documents that the Fusion has to submit to the city is on the city's development application webpage,
Right.
right? Um, and that's how I was able to get a hold of um, a neighborhood issue prior to me being on council and getting an understanding for where the neighbors are coming from, where the developer is coming from. Uh, there's a litany of information out there for people to really dissect, right? And if you're doing so in good faith, trying to understand where the developer is coming from and where city staff are coming from, because planning staff are privy to their comments as well, right? Because there are differences of opinion all the time, right? And that's part of the discourse, so we can piece out what truly is important for both parties and for the public. But yeah, like for me, I like what gave me confidence in trying to in supporting fusion is first, this is a block plan exercise. This is still very, very high level, right? They're still
Mm-hmm.
gonna have to come into council three, four, five more times
Right.
down the road.
Right.
And so there's a lot of opportunity for accountability, right? So there's a lot of commitments that Fusion made right now um, at this block plan level and during the last meeting. Now is an opportunity for someone like myself that's navigating with them through this process as a first term counselor to hold them accountable, right? Hey, are you actually doing this, right? If they come back for rezoning or for whatever amendment that may end up transpiring, there's a lot of opportunity, right? And I think we have to understand there's a relational aspect to this that we have to really be very uh, we have to work in good faith with and through. Um, and also, yeah, like I would encourage you if you are skeptical or if you have questions, read the planning documents. They have a whole bunch of stuff. They have Fusion has had the capacity to bring on a lot of high profile consultants. Um, you know, they did community engagement exercise for 2 years in a row with Sasaki. And for me, like these are things that you have to look at. And for me, like this takes a lot of work. This takes a lot of commitment. It's not easy to like coordinate these types of things, right? And
Right.
so for me, like that is a sign of goodwill. And
Mm.
that's a sign as well that these people, like, they're not just in it for the money, right? Like they are Guelph homebred. Uh, and they have and for them to be able to sell properly to the community, they do rely a lot on their reputation.
Right.
And for me, like I can relate to that because my family, we're in the home building business. And a lot of like our ability to retain clients does come down to reputation and word
Right.
of mouth. Like that's just how the world works in this industry. So again, like I just point back to a lot of the planning documents, the urban design brief, the planning justification, right?
Mm.
They highlight very clearly what they view as the assumption. Okay. And I would encourage those that like are skeptical of the new scheme to look back at the old secondary plan and see, okay, what are some things that have been addressed and been carried forward, because that's really the essence of how plans live on and how visions live on as well, right? From your high level conceptualization. A lot of it is just the knowledge transfer, right? That's very important to disseminate. Um, so yeah, that's kind of how I see it. Like good ideas will always be time tested and true. And there are ways in which we can uh, ensure those things are influenced as they move forward. But
Right.
again, plans change, but plans are there so that the most important, the most pertinent, um, and most valuable like pieces of knowledge are transmitted. Uh,
Right.
I guess that's how I would put it. Not quite poetic, but I think you see where I'm coming from.
I mean, if you're interested in poetry, maybe planning's not the area for you. But it's that I think that's fairly put. Uh, Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but I appreciate the insights of a planner into planning processes, and I hope the listeners do as well. So, Ken Yi Chu, until next time, thanks for joining us once again.
Yeah, I didn't know it was 30 minutes already, but yes, we'll chat again. Thanks for having me.
Time
Appreciate it.
flies, I know.